Chris's actual beliefs on gender and how it is classified are more complex than his stated beliefs. For someone so preoccupied with gender identity, Chris displays a staggering ignorance of how either gender typically behaves, and his views of both genders are extremely warped due to him taking the stereotypes he is presented with in television and music at face value. Several years ago, I put out a video talking about Chris Chan's gender, and why I choose to refer to Chris using male pronouns. I have since unlisted that video as some of my opinions and ideas expressed in it do not match my current beliefs, and I also think that I could express myself better now. For posterity's sake, I have left a link to it in the description of this video. Please accept this video as a replacement. My name is GiBi, and I run a channel called Good Idea, Bad Idea, which is about documenting stranger-than-fiction true stories and fictional worlds with so much depth that you might believe they're real. Basically, I like talking about nerdy stuff. The most popular topic that I cover is Chris Chan. The only video on my channel with over 1 million views is a 2-hour documentary about Chris's life from birth up until 2021. I would recommend watching that video before this one if you don't know who Chris Chan is. I wanted to set the record straight on Chris's pronouns before I release a follow-up to that video, and so I am releasing this 1 week before part 2 goes up. The reason that I'm making this video and not just putting out a statement that says, "I'm using male pronouns to refer to Chris and you gotta deal with it," is because the gender debate is both vitriolic and tribal, which is not a good combination. I've had people from one side call me all the most hateful names in the book because I'm calling Chris a he and apparently hurting trans people along the way. And I've had people from the other side insulting me for believing that making this video is even necessary, because Chris Chan is so obviously a man and it doesn't need explanation. Because I disagree with both of these takes, I figure I should explain myself so that your insults can be based on facts and not on your assumptions of my political or philosophical beliefs based on your own position within the ongoing gender debate. So before we talk about Chris, I'm going to have to talk about the gender debate in general. Please keep in mind during this section that me explaining someone's argument or someone's philosophy does not mean that I agree with them or think that their points are valid. The classical belief is that you can't change your gender. The word gender and the word sex mean the same thing. For hundreds of years, they've had the same definition in the dictionary until an unscrupulous scientist in the mid-1900s ruined 2 young boys' lives, invented the modern definition of gender, and then was swept under the rug of history because what he did was so horrific. Biological sex is determined by your chromosomes, XX for female and XY for male. There are, of course, people born with different numbers of chromosomes, and there are people born with both or neither sex organs that correspond with these chromosomes, although people of the classical belief would say that these fringe cases are a mere categorization error that our language has trouble with. Perhaps these people would say that 95% of all people have to have an attribute for that attribute to be part of the definition of being human. About 90% of the population is right-handed, and I don't think that anyone would say that being right-handed is part of the definition of being human, so it must be higher than 90%, but lower than 100%, so it's somewhere in there. We state scientifically that humans are bipedal, meaning that we have 2 legs, but there are some people who are born with 0 legs, or 4 legs, and that doesn't mean that they're not human. That's just an error in the way that we're capable of categorizing things based on language. People with the classical beliefs would say that this does not make their definitions invalid. These people make it clear that they don't think changing scientific definitions because of fringe cases in a system where random change is already expected makes sense. Thus, they don't believe that you can be born with the wrong gender. They believe that some people might prefer outwardly appearing as one sex instead of another, but they don't think it's possible for you to be born the wrong gender, because they think that gender and sex mean the same thing. You can't be born the wrong sex. You can only be born as you, and you are the sex that you are as determined by your chromosomes. You don't have the experiences of any other person, and thus to say that you would identify with one group, either XX chromosome havers, or another group, thus XY chromosome havers, is ridiculous. You only know what it's like to be yourself. In my experience, these people typically don't have problems with people getting sex change operations, but they might have an issue with having to refer to somebody who outwardly appears as one sex with the pronouns affiliated with the other. Last time I used an example of how people with this belief equate people with identity disorders to trans people. For example, a patient in a mental hospital who believes he's actually Napoleon and who demands that you call him emperor and bow to him has an identity disorder. People with the classical worldview would reason that the examples of a trans person asking you to call them by the pronouns of the sex to which they do not belong, and a person asking you to call them Napoleon, are the same, and that you don't have a moral obligation to acquiesce to their requests. The other belief system, in this case, is that gender and sex are separate things. Sex is defined by your chromosomes, once again, XX and XY, female and male, ovary havers and testicle havers, and that gender is defined by your feelings in your mind. In this case, gender is very much associated with your culture. If in one culture, such as ours, men are expected to be strong and athletic and physically large with muscles and they want to compete in sports like football, and women are expected to be thin and agile and beautiful and excited to compete in cooperative activities like cheerleading, then those become gendered expressions and gendered traits. The football player has a masculine trait, and the cheerleader has a feminine trait. People with this worldview believe that a male mind can exist within a female body. They believe that pronouns such as he and him, and she and her, should refer to the gender that somebody feels within their own mind. So you can have somebody who has the sex of male, somebody with XY chromosomes, an Adam's apple who is going bald with facial hair, but internally they have feminine traits and they feel female. That person should be referred to with feminine pronouns, and for all intents and purposes should be treated as a woman. These two belief systems are entirely incompatible. There is no common ground. Sometimes in debates there is common ground, and what separates people are their knowledge of facts, but that is not true in this situation. Let's use an example of a school board. Let's say you have members of a school board who both have the same worldview. They both want what's best for the children, they both want to spend money the most effective to help the children, and they both believe in following the opinions of experts, and both even subscribe to magazines that do sociological studies on developing children and young adults. But let's say they are subscribed to different magazines, and one article one guy reads says that children thrive when they're allowed to explore their interests, so he thinks that funding should be put towards hiring art teachers and getting new instruments for a band class. The other guy reads an article that young minds require a feeling of comfort in order to learn, and that developing kids need certain kinds of nutrition. So he wants the funding to go toward making the school physically more comfortable, like adding air conditioning and more windows, and he wants to make healthy food available to all the kids. Well, there you have an example where two people have the same belief system, but a different set of facts. These people can argue and debate those facts, and an argument or debate between them will always end up educating the other side. They might even find a compromise, or one side might change their belief and join the others, because what they are disagreeing on are facts, not belief systems. There are no facts in the gender debate. We're talking about feelings and the human mind. Even if you want to cite studies about these things, good luck convincing people that sociology and psychology are real sciences. The problem is that you can't point to the human mind. You can't point to gender. Now, there are facts about the ramifications of enacting policy tailored to both belief systems. It's very apparent that the depression and suicide rates among the transgender population is very high. If everyone treated them just like normal people and didn't question or attack their existence every day, they would live better lives. If we as a society accommodated them better instead of shaming them, then that would be better for everyone. If people with the classical worldview would just shut up and stop talking about what they believed to be biologically accurate, it would be better for trans people, and at the end of the day, who cares what's biologically accurate? Everyone should want what's best for their fellow humans, and so accommodating trans people is clearly the correct and moral choice of action. But it's also reasonable to question how making these changes to society would hurt more in the long term. For one, the explosion in the number of people who identify as transgender, especially young people, has been dramatic in recent years. Our culture has existed for hundreds of years without making the changes needed to accommodate them, so it's unclear if such a change is necessary, or if these problems will work themselves out. This might be a fad that will pass, and thus all of the resources we allocate into fixing it might have been better spent saving lives elsewhere. The more we normalize the small amounts of trans people there are, the more we might confuse cis children into thinking they might be trans when they otherwise would have been happy not thinking about it, and this might cause them unneeded harm and distress. We would be sacrificing children for the benefit of a tiny group of adults. That's not to mention people who detransition, people who thought they were trans and caused permanent damage to their body and then realized they were pressured into it. Should we really run headlong into sweeping decisions without thinking about the ramifications? Congratulations! That's the difference between being progressive and being conservative. We did it! Yay! Politics! Finger guns! Pew pew! The reason that I've laid all of this out is because from comments I've gotten, I know that people watching this video have both perspectives, and I wanted to make two things clear. One, I wanted to tell you guys that I understand your perspective before I talk about my own. And two, I want to make sure that you understand the other side before comment wars get started. I think it's very common for insulated people to not understand that the other side has a logical and coherent reason for believing what they believe and aren't just evil, or aren't just drones who do what they're told. There are very few people in the world who actually want to hurt others, and I think that categorizing your political opponents as evil actually just shows your own ignorance. Now, my personal political beliefs line up much better with the second group of people that I talked about. I think that a female mind can be born in a male body. I think that because that kind of thing is so uncommon that we as a country don't do much to take into account the struggles of trans people, and I think that we should do more. I think that grappling with your identity is hard. I think that depression is life-altering and we should accommodate people who suffer from it. As someone who's had the mildest case of dysphoria during a time in my life when my weight was rapidly changing, I still can't imagine being dysphoric about your own sex. For my entire life, I've supported the LGBT community and some of the endeavors by the trans movement. In my last video on this topic, I talked about how when the gay rights movement was going on, there was a binary between the sides. Either you thought gay people should get married and adopt children, or you thought that they shouldn't. There was no nuance. But the trans debate is different. The trans movement is asking for a lot of different things, and it is not inherently illogical to be in favor of some of them and against others. For example, you might have no problem using someone's preferred pronouns, but you might think that people should use the bathrooms that correspond to their present genitalia. Or you might think that people under 18 shouldn't be allowed to go on hormones, but once they are an adult and they've made their choice, you might support it. In my last video, I said it was not yet a cancelable transphobic offense to disagree with just one of the movement's positions, and that generally the people who are called transphobes are the people with the classical view. That's not true anymore. Since then, J.K. Rowling, who has spent the better half of 2 decades advocating and giving money to LGBTQ causes, and who is a huge supporter of transgender individuals, has said that she supported the movement, with the exception of trans women who still have penises being in women's shelters, and trans women competing in female sports. In the first case, the argument is that women's shelters are specifically places for women to go to avoid men because many have PTSD, and in the second case, because there is a biological reality that someone born with loss of testosterone, as people with XY chromosomes are, will usually be stronger than someone born with XX chromosomes, and thus competition between them is not fair. If you follow the news, you know that she was destroyed for this opinion. You can agree with 99% of the movement, you can give your time and money to help its cause, but if you have a single opinion that goes against it, even if that opinion is logical, and again, logical does not mean backed by science or correct, it just means it's not inherently contradictory. So even if your opinion is logical, you will still get ostracized. The reason I tell you this tale about J.K. Rowling isn't to comment on cancel culture. It's because I've received backlash, again from both sides, for my opinion on Chris Chan. At different times, I've held different views on Chris, and because of my opinions, I don't fall into either camp 100%, meaning I'll be attacked by both sides. And I just wanted to let people know who are hateful to those who disagree with them and who attack them online, that I don't care about you and that your life is a joke. In 2016, Chris Chan transitioned to female, and so I called him by his preferred pronouns, she, her. I also called him Christine. The reason I stopped is not because I was threatened by conservatives in my comment section, and it's not because I suddenly had a change of heart and decided that pronouns are dumb. It's because I learned more about Chris Chan. For a quick summary, Chris, who is okay with being called Chris, he doesn't mind that, he just doesn't want to be called Christian, was born as Christopher Chandler. When he was a kid, his parents renamed him to Christian, and in 2016 he legally renamed himself to Christine, although he'd been transitioning slowly since 2011. As far as Chris's gender expression goes, I don't think it's possible to really measure him up next to a normal person. Chris's ideas about the world come from his consumption of media, especially schlock aimed at kids, and also paradoxically, satire aimed at adults. Chris formed his identity back when he was a male around stereotypes depicted in cartoons. Chris tried to assert his manliness by acting like stereotypes for tough guys seen in kids' cartoons in the 80s, and also like sexual deviants, perverts, and goofballs as depicted in things like Beavis and Butthead and Family Guy. The fact that he learned how to be a woman from these shows is also apparent in his actions and in his writing. Don't forget that we have hundreds upon hundreds of pages of his writing in his comic book that he produced. The female characters of his book are often depicted as stereotypes you might find in schlocky 80s kids cartoons and in satirical adult animation of the 2000s. In one issue, Sonichu has to accompany his girlfriend Rosechu to the mall, her favorite place, to make sure that she doesn't spend a lot of money. She then goes on a shopping spree, because she's a girl. She is also kidnapped, and Sonichu has to save her as she is now a damsel in distress. In another comic, a girl character complains that boys don't get sad and only like gross things and violence. It is, in my opinion, clear that Chris does not know what it means to be either a man or a woman. He doesn't have enough knowledge of either to recognize which one he is within himself. I think it's clear from his actions that Chris is neither. Chris is a boy. Chris has always been a boy. A boy is, of course, a male child, but in our society, boys generally don't have masculine traits. Obtaining those masculine traits is usually what signifies the change from boyhood into manhood. For various reasons, including his mental health, his living situation, and the actions of the trolls who tormented him, Chris was never able to mature, and is forever stuck as an adolescent. He does physically have the body of an adult, and I think, although this is just speculation, that it was easier for him, because of his own desires, to become a woman than to admit to himself that he failed to become a man. Back in the realm of facts, let's talk about why Chris actually made the change to transgender. A troll suggested to Chris that he might find women's underwear comfortable, so he started wearing it. Keep in mind, a defining fact of Chris's life is his naivete, and a girl was talking to him online and giving him attention and approval for wearing women's clothing. That's more than enough incentive for him to do it. The suggestion for him to transition also came from an online troll. Chris at the time had only had sex once, with a prostitute, and had utterly failed at attracting women for his entire life. He made an ad for himself as a male prostitute, but didn't get any hits. A troll suggested that he become a trans woman and try to attract lesbians, and so he did. Soon after, he made an ad where he referred to himself as a woman and tried to sell himself to lesbians. His transition, at first, was nothing more than him trying to expand himself to a new market. So he doesn't understand gender, his current actions are easily definable as being a boy rather than a woman, and his reason for transitioning was him wanting to trick women into sex. Now let's talk about his early delusional stuff. Most trans people believe that they were born into the gender identity that they now express themselves in. Chris does not think this. Chris actually thinks that there are 3 versions of himself. He considers his 3 names, Christopher, Christian, and Christine, to be 3 different personalities that all exist within his mind. He can jump between them, and he can have different ones possess his body at different times. The first switch from Christopher to Christian came about when he was talking to a bear mascot who called him Christian by accident because he misheard him. Chris thought that this was a sign from God. The switch from Christian to Christine happened when he had a psychic vision of a woman in the 1960s who was attending Woodstock. He thought the woman was him from a past life. He also believes that thousands of years ago, he was an important alien princess from a different galaxy who was exiled from her home planet. He therefore thinks he is a female soul, and his female soul was put into the male body that he's now in. So he changed from one identity to another because of a sign from God, and then from that identity to a third because of a dream he had about a psychic woman and an alien princess. That is not the usual story that trans people tell when talking about how they came to understand their own gender identity, because Chris is not trans. Earlier I talked about how someone with a classical view of gender might equate a trans person to someone calling themselves Napoleon. I personally do not think that that is a fair comparison, because I think that anybody who thinks that they are Napoleon is delusional. But trans people are not delusional because I believe it's possible for a female mind to be in a male body and vice versa. Again, if you disagree with me, then we have different world beliefs, and you're not going to change my mind by arguing with me over the internet. To change a worldview, someone has to have a seriously profound experience, and that's not going to happen in the comment section of this video. Chris is literally in the same camp as people who believe that they're Napoleon. Chris has never shown any indication of dysphoria or gender questioning or anything typical of a trans person. For all intents and purposes, Chris is not asking you to call him a woman the way that trans people do. He's asking you to call him Goddess Blueheart of the nation Quickvillain, the way a person who believes that they're Napoleon would. Chris has shown every sign of someone with delusions about their identity. He also thinks he is part Sonichu, and of course his religion is all about there being another dimension where Sonichu lives and that Chris can travel to, and where he is a god in that dimension. He also believes that he has magical powers here in our world. For a large part of 2020, Chris was possessed by Sonichu. Chris's mind and spirit were split in the other dimension, and Sonichu, who is a male character, was here in Chris's body. Chris had no trouble being male 24/7 for an entire year, so long as it was Sonichu's persona that he was acting out. More recently, Chris has decided that his female soul was also actually Jesus Christ in a past life 2,000 years ago. Chris used to be Jesus, and now he allows Jesus to possess his body. If Chris truly was a woman, then he should have had trouble pretending to be Sonichu for a year. And if you think that that makes Chris gender fluid, which is when someone feels like they are one gender sometimes and another gender other times, then that means that you equate being gender fluid to having delusions that you're Jesus and a Pokemon, and that's not really something I think that you want to be arguing. The only argument I've heard for calling Chris female are from people who say that nothing I've said here matters. They would say that it doesn't matter that Chris was never dysphoric, that he never felt uncomfortable in his own body, that he only transitioned because he was trolled into cross-dressing and wanted to have sex with lesbians, that his explanation for his gender doesn't line up with actual trans people's explanations of gender, and that instead he chalks it up to magic, or that he's never demonstrated that he even understands what it means to be male or female, and instead acts like a perpetual child. They say that because Chris says he is female, and because he wants to be called by she/her pronouns, that that's the end of the discussion. And to that I say, I disagree. We have different worldviews. I would not just take someone's proclamation of their identity at face value. If someone came up to me and said they identified as an Apache attack helicopter and their pronouns were Apache, Apache, I would not refer to them as such just because they told me to. In the same way, I don't believe Chris is a female when he has done everything possible to disprove this status. And if you were being consistent with your worldview of calling Chris a she just because he wanted you to, then you would have to be calling a lot of edgy online trolls attack helicopters. I do not believe it is the morally right thing to do to call someone by pronouns which don't fit them if they are not being genuine, as that is harmful to actual trans people, and Chris is not being genuine. So yes, I call Chris by male pronouns. I don't think trans people have to prove to you that they are trans. In fact, I think that that line of thinking is harmful. But I think it's clear that Chris is not trans. I think it's clear that Chris Chan is delusional. But Chris did change his name legally to Christine, and I see no reason not to call him that. If he changed his name to Napoleon, I would call him Napoleon, but I wouldn't treat him like the actual historical figure, nor would I bow to him like an emperor. That's the difference. Finally, I wanted to bring up something related to this topic that I said in my last video. In my video going over Chris's history, I talked about a group of teenagers who befriended and manipulated and trolled Chris. The only information I had on them came from the Quickie, which is very inconsistent about when they use a trans person's preferred pronoun and names. I honestly did not know these people were trans, and that the Quickie article might have the wrong name and gender until after I made the video. The Chris Chan community likes to name eras in Chris's life with fun names, like fans do from arcs of their favorite TV shows. They also like to give trolling groups fun names, like villains in comic books. The name of this group of trolls is the Teen Troon Squad. Up until 2 months ago, I thought that name was created by the Chris Chan community to refer to this group of teenagers, the same way that other groups were things like the Idea Guys, or the Guard Dogs, or the Watchmen. I had no idea that Troon was an offensive name for trans people. In fact, from this point onward, I have no intention of ever saying that word again. I only said it twice in this video so that you knew which word I was talking about. I certainly would not have named an entire chapter in my video that word if I had known it was offensive. I do not personally use any offensive words on my channel, and I apologize. I don't expect the opinion that I expressed in this video to be my opinion on this topic forever. In a year, I might cringe at how I decided to format this video and want to make another updated one. I don't know. One of my personal beliefs about arguments on the internet in general, especially if you're a creator or have any amount of followers, is that the amount that you should publicly discuss an issue is inversely proportional to how important that issue is. Basically, if we disagree on politics or religion or current events, I will shrug and tell you to believe whatever you want. But if you disagree with my interpretation of a single shot from a TV show, or if you like a sports team that I don't like, then I will hunt you down, and I will destroy you. Thank you for watching. Please keep it civil in the comments. You can express your opinion, you can correct me because I'm sure that I got stuff wrong and definitely did not go into enough depth on some things. You can even express hatred towards me. But I'm not going to hold back the ban hammer if I see people not respecting one another. My next video about Chris will come out 1 week from today. Mark your calendars.